Welcome into another episode of Is This Rumor a Real Rumor? In episode 1, we talked about Mikal Bridges and the Brooklyn Nets, and in episode 2, we're going to be talking about DeAndre Ayton and Portland's apparent willingness to trade the third overall pick for him. And this all stems from a tweet from a guy named Flex from Jersey, who is a Suns insider who has been hit or miss on certain things in the past. And when we talk about reporters who aren't Adrian Wojnarowski or Shams Charania or a Chris Haynes for that matter, it's always best to look at their track record and the way that they word certain things. That can help you determine the legitimacy of a rumor. So we're going to dive into some of the stuff Flex has said in the past. Now, Flex from Jersey gets a lot of credit for being early on the Kevin Durant stuff, and I truly think he does have a source inside the Phoenix Suns organization somewhere. But a lot of the details regarding Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns last offseason were false. He had this tweet on June 29th, 2022. He said, "Unless Ayton is willing to come back to Phoenix for less than the max, I believe he's gone. He'll find out his true value around the league tomorrow. Sign and trade is still the most likely option at the moment." Of course, DeAndre Ayton did come back to the Phoenix Suns on a max contract and was not signed and traded, and that was never really much of a possibility as Ayton's restricted free agency played out. He also then had this tweet on July 1st where he said, "Per league source, a potential blockbuster 3-team deal between Phoenix, Brooklyn, and Utah is being discussed and could be finalized tomorrow, centered around DeAndre Ayton to Utah, Donovan Mitchell to Brooklyn, and Kevin Durant to Phoenix. Other players and picks are involved per source." But then it came out that, Brooklyn can't have Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell on the roster together, so Ben Simmons' $30+ million contract would also have to be heading somewhere in such a trade, which made things iffy under the CBA. He said, "I'm told the parameters of this deal are being seriously discussed at the moment, but is not finalized, and other players and pieces might be moved in the process," and continued to double down on the situation. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. He had this tweet regarding Kyrie Irving, saying the Nets are not out of the woods and he could still be moved after opting in yesterday. That was on June 28th, and of course Kyrie Irving then wanted a trade. But the key word here in all these tweets is the word could. This could happen, that could happen. This sets up a situation where if these things play out, these tweets were correct, but if they don't play out, then a lot of people defend them by saying, well, he didn't say it would happen, he only said it could happen. Flex was extremely confident that Kevin Durant would get traded to the Phoenix Suns last offseason, and that did not happen. Of course, it did happen at the trade deadline, so you could say Flex was right in the end, but in regards to the details and what was being discussed and the whole DeAndre Ayton situation, in regards to all that, if you take the word could seriously, Flex was wrong on a lot of stuff last offseason. There's also a tweet about how the Suns were having conversations with the Indiana Pacers about a deal centered around Domantas Sabonis at the 2022 trade deadline. That might have been true, but conversations are just conversations. GMs talk to other GMs all the time about all sorts of assets. This is a very common thing. This doesn't mean anything concrete whatsoever. There's been other stuff in the past that has been discussed but hasn't played out for the Phoenix Suns. But then again, nobody bats 100%. Nobody. And Flex rose to prominence with his reporting about Chris Paul coming to the Phoenix Suns. He had a tweet on November 7th of 2020 that said the Suns feel like it's time to go for it with a young core, and Chris Paul is also motivated to get something done. But then again, about a month before that, he said, "We're not getting Chris Paul, guys." He seemed to have had some good intel in the past, but also seems to have missed a lot as well. So I believe that anything that is said here, you have to put at least a speculative label on already. But let's tie this into the Portland Trail Blazers, because Flex from Jersey had this tweet on May 18th. He said, "Multiple sources have confirmed Portland has interest in DeAndre Ayton and could be willing to discuss a deal centered around the third overall pick and additional pieces. Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller are both considered to be foundational players in this upcoming draft." For me, I think the key phrase here is could be willing to discuss. As I said, GMs have conversations and discussions all the time, and that word could pops up once again. Now, after a bunch of Blazer fans thought this was absolutely ludicrous, Flex clarified it with this quote tweet. He said, "Please read the entire tweet and understand I was told Portland would require other pieces for a deal like this to be something they'd be willing to discuss." Sorry if that wasn't clear in the tweet below. They're shopping the third pick and have had interest in Ayton since last summer. So there's actually quite a bit to dissect here, because the whole Portland would require other pieces for a deal like this thing is a little bit silly to me, because the only other tradable contracts outside of Devin Booker and Kevin Durant that the Phoenix Suns have are Chris Paul, who would hold no value to Portland in a trade, and Portland would be taking on like $65 million in salary if they traded for both Ayton and Chris Paul, so that's a non-starter. The only other contracts are Landry Shamet at $10 million a year, Cam Payne, who's a non-guaranteed next season but could technically be traded for $6.5 million, Ish Wainwright, who's on a minimum contract, and second-round picks. None of those assets would do anything for Portland in a DeAndre Ayton deal involving the third overall pick. When you're talking about an asset the magnitude of the third pick, second-round picks are irrelevant. Landry Shamet, Cam Payne, Ish Wainwright are irrelevant. So this is already super fishy with the phrase, Portland would require other pieces for a deal like this. But also the last sentence is intriguing to me as well. As he said, they're shopping the third pick and have interest in Ayton since last summer. The first tweet said multiple sources have confirmed Portland has interest in DeAndre Ayton. So I don't necessarily doubt that part of it in terms of Portland having interest in DeAndre Ayton. It just seems like this report took the potential of Portland having interest in DeAndre Ayton, and then took the fact that Portland is shopping the third overall pick, which is a completely separate notion, and lumped the two things together as something that could possibly be discussed, which means nothing. Now, a lot of Suns fans don't think DeAndre Ayton is worth his max contract, and I agree. DeAndre Ayton seemed to quit on the Phoenix Suns in last year's playoff series. He was getting benched in crunch time for Jock Landale at times, who's on a minimum contract. Yet supposedly, with DeAndre Ayton making $32 million next year, he is worth the third overall pick in this year's draft. The third overall pick could be Scoot Henderson, which is a guy who would go number one in a lot of other drafts. That makes absolutely no sense to me from a value standpoint. It doesn't fix any of Portland's issues. The two biggest ones are perimeter defense. A center's not going to help with that. And the other one is rebounding. And DeAndre Ayton and Jusuf Nurkic are pretty equal in terms of rebounding. So to give up the chance at a potential future superstar with that third pick for a center that's not worth his contract and doesn't solve any of Portland's issues makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. And just to wrap up this video, there was a Reddit comment from Travis Demers, who is the voice of the Portland Trailblazers, who used to do Rip City Radio 620 with Chad Doing. And they've had Flex from Jersey on their radio show multiple times, and Travis said this. He said, he told Chad and I KD would end up in Phoenix a year and a half before he did, along with other things he was dead on about. I talked to Flex tonight. I can't give the details of what he said. It's not my place, but I wouldn't be too worried about this report. And this kind of sums up how I feel about Flex. He had some impressive intel on Kevin Durant and Chris Paul, it seemed, but a lot of the details with the KD trade and the timeline of which that was happening, as well as the whole DeAndre Ayton situation last summer, seemed to be completely off. A lot of reporters are just the middleman and relaying information that they hear. And almost anyone who has sources that they relay information from gets some good intel and gets some bad intel. In order to truly maximize the accuracy of the intel that these reporters are getting, they have to form relationships with GMs, front offices, and personnel across the league. That's why Woj and Shams are so special. They've managed to forge a lot of relationships within front offices, and that's why, for the most part, you can believe what they say. But then again, front offices will leak stuff that's not true to play up the value of certain assets, and that could be what is the case here with DeAndre Ayton. Flex has also gone on the record saying Detroit would give up the 5th pick for DeAndre Ayton, which makes absolutely no sense to me. They have Jalen Duren, who's coming off a successful rookie season, and they just traded for James Wiseman. Both those guys are natural centers, so trading the 5th pick in a really good draft, who could be a potential future superstar for DeAndre Ayton, would make no sense. For reference, the 3rd pick in DeAndre Ayton's draft was Luka Doncic, and the 5th pick in his draft was Trae Young. Both those guys have become bona fide all-stars. It would be smart for James Jones and the Phoenix Suns front office to try and get some information put out there that DeAndre Ayton holds value across the league. For teams desperate enough, maybe the Dallas Mavericks, it could get them to part with some assets that probably aren't smart for the Mavs to part with in a DeAndre Ayton trade. But then again, this Dallas Mavericks team gave up assets for Kyrie Irving, and we saw how that played out last season. So my overall grade on the rumor that Portland could be interested in giving up the 3rd overall pick for DeAndre Ayton is it's a fake rumor. I don't believe it one bit. Could Portland have interest in Ayton? Perhaps. I wouldn't deny that. I don't think they should, but I could see them viewing him as an upgrade over Jusuf Nurkic. But the pick in this year's draft that I could see Portland giving up for Ayton in a scenario is maybe the 23rd pick, not the 3rd pick. And if the Blazers gave up the 23rd pick for DeAndre Ayton in any sort of package, I'd be very, very frustrated. You would hear me rant about it on a live stream right here on this channel. So anyway, let me know what you think of this rumor down in the comment section below. Leave a like on this video. It helps me out, and subscribe. And with that being said, I'm out of here. I'll catch you in the next video. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.